Hello and welcome to today's webinar on climate, race and Indigenous peoples. Thanks for joining us from wherever you are in the world. I am Amrita Mukherjee and I'm a lecturer at the University of Leeds in the School of Law and the Programme Director for the LLM in International Law and Global Governance. So today, I'm very pleased to be chairing this event, this important event. We have three speakers who we're very pleased are able to join us. Ingrid Rojas from the University of Leeds, Dr. Adelle Thomas at the Climate Analytics Centre in the Bahamas, and Hindu Umaru Ibrahim, who is a very famous environmental activist from Chad. So we'll be beginning with an introduction from me, then moving on to our presentations, and then having a question and answer session after the last presentation, which will start around about 2:45 for about half an hour, and then finish at about 3:15. So, firstly, I'd like to introduce the host organization for today's event. The Priestley International Centre for Climate is an interdisciplinary research centre for research at the University of Leeds, with over 350 members, including myself, working to find climate solutions. One area of focus is on Indigenous peoples, and Ingrid will be speaking more on the IHACC, the Indigenous Health Adaptation to Climate Change Programme, shortly during her presentation. I work at the School of Law at the university, and my areas of research and teaching are on Indigenous peoples' rights, decolonizing international law, and international human rights law. And I've written and taught on the need to preserve rights to land, self-determination and ways of life for Indigenous peoples. It has been very apparent to me as to how little Indigenous people are considered on matters that affect them most, such as climate change, whether in local, national or international forums. There is no doubt that more work is needed on strengthening and clarifying avenues for redress for violations of rights in relation to climate justice, and the need to broaden the focus to include human-centered concerns which will lead to greater justice and equitable treatment for all, including vulnerable populations. Today, we're going to be exploring the links between climate, racial justice, and Indigenous peoples. The proliferation and intensification of climate change particularly impacts the lives and existence of Indigenous people. Indigenous people also, through traditional knowledge handed down through generations, have a crucial role in climate change they adaptation, and mitigation. However, racial justice has meant that injustice has meant that they have not been able to exercise that role and have instead been excluded, dispossessed, and exploited. In light of the Black Lives Matter movement, we at the Priestley Centre felt now was a good time to reflect on these difficult topics. It's certainly true that we won't be able to achieve climate justice if we don't achieve racial justice. Systematic racism means that not everyone is able to access environmental and climate justice. And the COVID-19 crisis has shed further light on just how embedded inequalities cause people of color severe hardships and loss of lives. Governments, international bodies, and corporate entities should recognize and address the effects of racism and climate change and ensure justice and the closure of governance gaps. I hope that's helped to frame today's discussion. I'll now introduce you to our first speaker. Just to say, please do send in your questions anytime and we'll discuss them after the three speakers have presented. You can write your questions into the Q&A box at the bottom right hand of this screen. So let's begin today with our fabulous speakers. Firstly, our Priestley Centre researcher, Ingrid Arotoma Rojas, who is dialing in from Peru. She is working on Indigenous health adaptation to climate change. Ingrid will be talking about climate change and food vulnerability, the voice of Indigenous Shawi people of Nuevo Progreso, Peru. Thank you.
Thank you, Rita. I'm going to start my presentation then. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I'm Ingrid Arotoma. I'm a Quechua researcher working with Indigenous peoples in the Peruvian Amazon. And I'm here presenting the first part of my PhD research, trying to understand Indigenous people's own voices about how climate change is impacting their food systems. And here I'm going to present my first part of my collaboration with the Shawi people. This part will inform a broader advocacy campaign to try to connect these voices with policymakers to try to solve these problems. So first of all, I want you all to think about how important is food in your daily life. It's the same for Indigenous people. Food is a centerpiece to understand the physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual dimensions of health and well-being. And currently, because of globalization and ongoing colonization and environmental disruptions, there is a nutritional transition characterized by a growing importance of external food and a less availability of traditional foods. And usually Indigenous peoples do not have control over these issues. In this context, climate change adds another layer of complexity to understanding and responding to these challenges. So the objectives of this part of my research is to try to understand from Indigenous people's own voices, values, and perceptions about these current food system changes, the socio-ecological drivers of this, including climate change, as well as the consequences in this, including their future visions of the community. And I will do it by taking the study case of the Shawi men in Nuevo Progreso, a very small community in the Amazon rainforest of Peru. So the Shawi people are the fifth most numerous Indigenous peoples in the Peruvian Amazon, and they are mostly located in Loreto region, northeast of Peru. They have an ongoing history of exploitation and resistance since colonial times. And my research is in-depth and place-based, and Nuevo Progreso is a small community where 97 families live, and they don't have electricity or access to clean water. So I spent almost a month in early 2019 in Nuevo Progreso, and my fieldwork was only possible because of an ongoing relationship between the Indigenous Health Adaptation to Climate Change program with this community. In my stay there, I did 23 semi-structured interviews with men. I also tried to interview women, but this is a very patriarchal society, so it was extremely difficult. So I stayed with the results of the men only. I participated in 4 activities with them. We went fishing, we went farming, and at the end of my stay, I did a men-only focus group with them. So Nuevo Progreso, since 2010, the government have started the construction of a road that connects Yurimaguas, that is like the biggest city in the area, with Balsa Puerto, that is the capital district. So there is a road here. It doesn't show in the map, but like in this road, every time I could see there were lots of timber trucks. So the road construction is increasing the rise of logging in the area. And Logging is also allowing the installment of like crops for agro-exportation, like papaya and rice. And if we could see here in this road through other part, like the road construction has enabled them to also install palm oil plantations nearby. So this is hugely affecting their food systems. So traditionally, the Shawi have depend on food from the forest that they obtain from hunting, fishing, and gathering. And they also depend on food from farming, mainly basically with cassava and plantain. And they do this fermented cassava drink called masato, where they could drink all day and try to feel full with that. There is a little part of external food basically bring by food aid programs by the government. But in my fieldwork, what I found and what the men told me is that there was an increased less availability of food from the forest. So there were no more animals to hunt. There were no more fishes in the river streams, and there was a growing importance on food from farming. So they were eating mostly plantain with some like chilies, or they were drinking masato all day to try to feel full. They didn't have access to game meat anymore. And there was a growing importance of external food because they were trying to buy fish to feed themselves. So the money, they were obtaining the money by having contracts with loggers, usually illegal loggers, or by renting their land to papaya crops or like rice plantations. So additionally to this, since 2014, the community has experienced rapid flooding, and now it's a recurrent event. It happens every 2 years, and it specifically damages crops and small animals that are a very big important safety net nowadays for them. And many of them told me that, for example, when the flood comes at night, it's really difficult to protect their belongings and the small animals, so it damages all. They have also experienced an increase in the temperature that enabled men to work in the farm. There is with no more trees, there is no more shade where to rest, so they have to work less hours. And they also think this is impacting fish population by making the water stream hotter. They have also experienced precipitation changes that increase the water river streams, and they cannot cross the river, for example. So climatic conditions are exacerbating Shawi food system vulnerability. And so I started to ask them, why do they think this is happening? And maybe this is the most interesting part of my research, because I could see the road every day, right? I could see the trucks full of timber, and I could try to understand how this is impacting the forest. But when I started to ask them, why do they think this is happening? All of them started to tell me this narrative that they feel that the main driver of these changes is their own population growth. And I couldn't understand it right immediately until I started to read and to learn more about their worldview. So the Shawi understand the world has been divided in 9 spaces. And there is a space where there is the physical, natural world, like the sun, the moon, the rain, the wind, but there is also intersected with the more spiritual dimensions of it. So there is death, there is the space for the spirits. So among these 9 spaces, there is the space of the forest, or Nupalte, where the Shawi believe they live there in relation with the mountain spirits, with the trees, with the plants, with the animals. And when there is an imbalance there is nowhere else to blame by themselves. So they feel really guilty about it, and they feel that they are the main drivers of these changes in the forest. And when I started to ask them about the loggers, they were like really clearly saying that there's not the loggers' fault, it's their fault, because they are the ones doing the renting their land with loggers to have some money to buy fish to feed their families. So they feel that because of their own population growth, they are all going to the forest and trying to predate it. They are doing these contracts. They are trying to catch even small fishes there in the need to feed their families. And this is having hugely consequences among the community, because food usually is shared with the neighbors, with the community members, and without game meat there, you cannot share it. So there is no reinforcement of the relationships there. At the familial level is also changing gender roles, because the men are usually the hunters, the providers of the prepared food. And this is changing completely. And now they are, with their free time, because they don't want to go hunting anymore, they are participating in government programs, and the government is arriving there trying to make them grow more market-related food, so more cacao, for example. And they are doing it because it's a free project where they are given some like utensils, and they are given some knowledge to do it. And also at an individual level, this is having hugely consequences in their mental health. So they feel upset when they cannot go hunting. They feel upset when they go hunting and come back with no prey. And this might have like a relation with the increase of alcoholism in some communities, or in other families with the belief in more other religiosities, right? Like the church there. So when I asked them about what's their future vision, like what will happen, what needs to happen, they were all saying that they need their population to keep growing. So here population growth is the cause, but it's also the strategy. And when I asked them why, they were all clear and saying that's the only way the government will pay attention to us. And it's because we don't have more people here, that we don't have services, we don't have electricity, we don't have access to clean water, and we don't have access to a better education. And education was also really important for them to attend, because they want the schools in their community to provide new knowledge, new technical knowledge to produce their own food, to try to do fish farms, to try to cope with hunger. So that's their expectation in education, and the government is only giving them schools if there is enough children there. So they want to have, they want to keep growing as a population, and that's their strategy, to maybe try to focus on producing their own food and food sovereignty for them, and maybe let the forest to recover themselves. And that's the strategy they have. So as a way of concluding, I think I have more questions than answers here. And I want to recall the attention of climate justice. So here, climate change magnifies Indigenous people's vulnerability, who are already experiencing changes, right? So there is this road construction, and there is this agroexportation crops. And it's not to feed like the papaya, the rice, the palm oil. It's not to feed them. It's basically to feed the cities. It's basically to send it to other countries. So I think how guilty they feel about the changes they are experiencing. And I'm trying to think, how guilty do we feel? How guilty do I feel when I go to the supermarket and buy papaya or buy rice, right? So it's not quite like just that they feel that guilty of the changes they are experiencing, because they don't have that control over. And I think another important thing I want to recover from this research is that it's really important to understand that Indigenous people will have like a say in this. They have their own way to understand the world. And this is like, understanding this will make the government trying to understand what do they want. And in this sense, like population growth, how to break this vicious cycle, it might be by a changing of the government. Like they have the right to have access to these services. They don't have to be bigger, or they don't have to be an urbanized city to access to these services. So I think that without considering their worldviews, the government is pushing for a more market-oriented response that increases their vulnerability, because they are pushing for this cacao plantation that is not for feed them, it's for selling. And they are not wanting, they don't want that. They want to keep their food sovereignty, and they need the school to provide these skills. Thank you.
Amrita, I think you're muted.
Apologies. Thank you, Ingrid, so much for that presentation. Really interesting. Please write down your questions on the Q&A box. So now, please, we'll hear Dr. Adelle Thomas, who is dialing in from the Bahamas. Adele is a Senior Caribbean Research Associate at Climate Analytics and Director of the Climate Change Adaptation and Resilience Research Centre at the University of the Bahamas. Adele will be presenting the link between climate change and racial justice. Thank you, Adele.
Thanks, Amrita, and good morning, everyone from the Bahamas. And thank you to the Priestley Centre for putting on this much-needed event. My brief talk this morning focuses on the link between climate change and racial justice. And I think I've been asked to engage on this particular topic largely because of a blog that my colleague Luana Haynes and I published back in June. It was called Black Lives Matter, the link between climate change and racial justice. And we wrote this blog not because we are particular experts on racial justice, but because, like a lot of people, we were appalled at the racial injustices that were being highlighted in the instances of police brutality in the US. Those horrific scenes and videos of George Floyd, of Michael Brown, of Philando Castile, and the many other African Americans that were killed by police officers were heartbreaking, and they spurred protests from diverse groups from around the world. And the spotlight was really on the US to provide justice for victims of police brutality. However, while there was this much needed attention that was being given to the plight of Black people and police brutality in the US, there seemed to be a disconnect and a lack of understanding or acknowledgement or recognition by many people that these police killings were symptoms of larger racially biased systems and structures. The Black Lives Matter movement wasn't just about unjust police-related deaths, but about systemic and institutionalized racism that has suppressed the economic and social development of Black communities. Police brutality is just one, albeit a very significant example of the many ways in which Black people are marginalized and targeted. And so we wanted to highlight this in our blog, that being upset about police killings in the US was just a start to acknowledging systemic racism. And we felt that we really needed to make that link between racial justice and climate change in particular. Many of our colleagues in the climate change community expressed their horror at police brutality in the US, but thought that because they didn't particularly focus on environmental advocacy or on racial advocacy, then they didn't have a role or a voice or a place in commenting on this and standing up for change, or that they didn't have any business engaging with these issues. And so to show just how pervasive racial justice is and how it affects every aspect of society, not only in the USA, but around the world, we showed some examples of how racial injustice is linked to climate change. And so one of the examples that we used was the case of Hurricane Katrina and New Orleans. And this was a particularly important example for me because my father was from New Orleans and I have family that lives there. So it really struck home for me. Back in 2005, Hurricane Katrina had devastating consequences for the city. Over 80% of the homes that were lost in the storm belonged to Black people, and Black people made up over half of the total number of people that died. And this was not a coincidence. There was this legacy of unequal flood protection in New Orleans, according to race. Racially biased and unequal distribution of government funding resulted in subpar flooding protection for Black neighborhoods. Board members that decided on allocation of government funding were mostly wealthy and white, and they lived in wealthy and white areas. And so they decided that the areas that they lived in should be the ones where federal funds should be used for flood protection. So when Hurricane Katrina struck, Black neighborhoods were the ones where the levees failed and where we saw a concentration of death and destruction. And even after the hurricane, there were racial disparities in who was able to access recovery aid. Black people, again, were significantly less likely to have access to assistance for recovery of their households or businesses. And so this was just one of the many examples of how Black people are often located in areas that are more vulnerable to climate risks, and they are also less able to respond to impacts when they do occur. We also drew on examples from outside of the United States to show the connection between racial justice and climate change. At the national scale, countries that were once colonized by Europeans and largely consist of Black people or people of color are among the most vulnerable to climate change. Many small island developing states and least developed countries have histories of colonization that are built on white racial supremacy. And these are also the countries that are most vulnerable to climate change, despite negligible greenhouse gas emissions. So at the national scale, we see this racial disparity in vulnerability to climate change and in levels of economic development that are able to be harnessed to respond to those climate impacts. Within these countries, we also see inequality in the distribution of climate risk at the community level. So in the Bahamas, for instance, the legacy of colonization has resulted in white Bahamians having higher levels of socioeconomic status than Black Bahamians. Even though all Bahamians are vulnerable, there are racial disparities in who has the resources that are needed to reduce risk, such as money for insurance, social capital that is needed to influence policy making, and funds to repair homes and recover businesses. And these inequalities were exposed after Hurricane Dorian, which we had last year. And we saw a racial difference in people who lost everything and had to rely on insufficient government resources, and those who were able to relocate to second homes or move in with friends and family. We also highlighted how racial injustice is related to the marginalization of Black expertise in the climate change community. After the Black Lives Matter movement escalated in June, there were many Black climate change scientists and practitioners that came forward with their stories of being one of very few Black experts in their field. And this led to people such as the former president of the American Meteorological Service, Dr. Marshall Shepard, being mistaken for a hotel staff member or a shuttle driver when he attends conferences. And this is an area where I can personally attest to these injustices. Within institutions that I have worked for, people have thought that I am a secretary or I'm someone's assistant. At IPCC meetings, I have seen African colleagues ask to show their identification when other white colleagues are allowed to enter venues without being checked. And it is these racial biases and personal microaggressions that make it more difficult for Black climate experts to be respected and effective in their field. Growing up, I was told, along with many other Black people, that I had to be at least twice as good as others in order to be recognized. And that has unfortunately both served me well and proven to be true. And so in closing, I just want to highlight that racial injustice, racist systems, and racist institutions are pervasive. They are present in all corners of the world and affect all aspects of society, including the climate change community. These are issues that affect everyone, not just Indigenous people in developing countries or African Americans in the USA. My co-author Ruana and I are not particular experts on racial justice. We were just angry and sad and frustrated about the lack of connection being made between racial justice and climate change. And my message to all of you is that you don't have to be an expert to act. You don't have to have a background in racial justice to make a difference. Dig deeper. Look at the structures that you are a part of. How do they contribute to inequality? What can you do to affect change? The Black Lives Matter movement showed us that we need solidarity, allyship, and action. We need everyone to stand together for change. And that means acknowledging your own advantages and privileges. It may mean giving up advantages that you enjoy at the expense of others. But either you are for racism or you are against it. And if you are against racism, then start with finding out how you can personally affect change and get started. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Adele, for making some very powerful points, very timely, important points for us. If we can now move on to Hindu. Hindu Umaru Ibrahim is dialing from Chad today. She is an environmental activist, member of Chad's pastoralist Mobororo, hope I pronounced that properly, community, and UN Sustainable Development advocate, president of the Association for Indigenous Women and Peoples of Chad, and a member of the Earthshot Prize Council, which was launched last week. So thank you, Hindu, if you'd like to present for us.
Thank you very much, and hi everybody. It's really a great pleasure to be with you in this panel, hearing from my sister Ingrid and Dr. Adelle. That's already inspiring for me, and then it's setting the tone of really how the racial injustice and climate injustice are there. Let me start by telling you, you know, in many of the panels, when you set up and then you found yourself, you are the only one woman, and you are Black one woman, and you are Black Indigenous and one woman. So I think for them, it's fine because you are checking the box. And for you, you feel like why they want me to talk about the women issues because I am woman, or why they want me to talk about Indigenous issues, or why they want me to talk about the African issues or Black issues. And then you found yourself why we have all these discriminations when we wanted to solve the one thing we have together, our planet and our earth. So anyway, I would like to start with you sharing the journey of my communities, the Indigenous peoples that call it Mbororo pastoralists living in Chad. My peoples is still nomadic. Most of them living from one place to another one, found in water and pastures. Our entire life, we depend from the rainfall. We do not depend from the end of the month salaries. And when Inge said like people selling the food in the supermarket, for us, it's our forests who are our supermarket, our pharmacy, our fresh water. So we are collecting all from this brooch and these areas that we are living on need. And we do not waiting for the end of the month salary because we don't have this cash to buy, go and buy it. But we are waiting to see the cloud if the rain is coming. And that can allow it us to get a crops or pastures for our cattle. So our way of life is living in harmony with the nature. And that's why also as Indigenous peoples in all the corner of the world, we are protecting our ecosystem. And that's how we are living for a centuries, 1,000 years with my peoples and with my communities. We continuously doing that. But yet, when the climate change start hitting us, especially those last decade, it's becoming much harder and it's impacting our life and creating, increasing the discrimination we already have and increasing the social injustice we already experience because we do not have schools, we do not have hospitals, and we still living in our same way. And with the climate change, is becoming doubly marginalized. It's a human right violations. And why I say human right violations, because if you do not have access to the land, that means your right to land is violated. If you do not have access to resources, to a water, that means your right to the water and your right to development is already violated. And then for us, it is not just like writing it in the reports, but it is living it every day. I give you the example of those 3 weeks. We are experiencing a very heat flood around all our region in the Sahel. You know, in Jamena, it's a town capital of the Chad, but people live with the canoe from one neighborhood to another neighborhood because all the streets are flooded like a rivers. We never experienced that before. And now it's really increasing in all the places. And what is the consequence for us? Food insecurity. Because when the rain didn't come, it's a drought. If the rain come in a very big way, it is a flood. So all it's ending with the food insecurity. Who are the most hitting? The peoples in my communities, those who are already marginalized. The people in the city, if they get them cash, they can go to the market or to the supermarket, buy food. But the people in my community, even if they have cash, they cannot buy it because there is no market. So all the market is destroyed. So that's how we are really living and impacting by what is happening. So for us, we are not only also the victim, we are resilient because we are building from our traditional knowledge, the way of living in harmony with the nature. We are building our resilience. And that's what is keeping us alive, even with this extreme weather event, even with the marginalization from all the rest of the populations. So we use our traditional knowledge to restore our land. We use our traditional knowledge to find a water points even during the drought season. And the knowledge of man and women's are also different, because when you have the climate change, then the men are leaving the communities to go to the cities to reach for the work. Women who are left behind, they are doubly marginalized, but they are doubly innovators. They are the one who know where they can find all the left of the foods, the water, how they secure them communities. So for us, the traditional knowledge are really very important for now. And luckily, it's got recognized by the Paris agreements after 20 years of negotiations. And you know, the discrimination or about that, they accept to recognize our knowledge into a specific articles, Article 7.5. But when we ask about our rights, they put it just in the preambles. They refuse to recognize it officially because it's not what it's matter for them. And we see this division immediately for us. And what will be helpful, it is the Sustainable Development Goals framework, who can be not leave anyone behind, but how we can turn it into a realities that the Sustainable Development Goals to be localized, to help the indigenous communities, the local communities, the women and children, the peoples with disabilities, those who are frontline of each crisis that we are facing, and then turn it to a development method. That will be the best way maybe to reduce this social injustice and then climate injustice. We can do it if we want, but how we can do it? We need to open the space to the decision making. Dr. Adelle said that when you are a Black, you are entering a room of negotiations. They want to check if you deserve to be in this room or not, because maybe in your face it's not written doctor, but it's written just so you are a colored person. But if you are white, you can get in. So imagine when I'm wearing my traditional clothes, my community clothes that I love, that is my identity, and I get to a room where there is just like white man with a Black suit sitting there finding themselves they are expert. It's so frustrating. And when they give you the floor, I speak, they just like get you as pity. but they do not want to listen. They go to them business as usual, how they can save the economy, how they can be much powerful. But this system, as indigenous peoples, we start to making change. We say, you cannot talk about us without us. We have to be sitting in the same tables and take the decision with you, or otherwise don't talk about indigenous peoples. And then they change the system. We've been sitting in the tables and discussing with them about our knowledge, and they have to respect it more. It is maybe moving in one step, but stepping back with the COVID. This is the sad part, because in the community level, this marginalization and discrimination show it the double face with the COVID, because all the decisions that have been taken, all the measures are so adapt to the modern life, not to the indigenous life. I give you one example on this one. When the lockdown the frontiers, my community are nomadic. We are transboundary and we follow the season. And COVID do not respect the season. If it is raining or if it is hot, it doesn't matter. COVID is still with us. But the cattle that wanted to graze the green grass and who wanted the water, they have to move across border to go. But when they cross the border, they're violating our right, and then they marginalize us more. And then community is still fighting to get access to the shrinking resources. So those things need to be taken into the SDGs, into the Paris agreements, and give us the space to explain why, if they close the borders, maybe it can work for Paris, New York, London, but it cannot work for Chad, for my communities, or for the peoples in Peru, because we are exchanging our product in order to survive. So we need to adapt the wisdom of indigenous peoples, the knowledge of indigenous peoples, with the science, with the technology, in order to rebuild a new resilience and to have an inclusive system that can respect the human dignity. At the end of the day, you can be black, white, woman, man, older or children. We all are a human being. We drink the same water. We need the food in the tables to eat. We have the same air we are breathing. So our rights must be equal. And we must all think about how we can share our resources in a better manner, how we can leave it for the next 7 upcoming generations. And that must be a lesson learned for the COP26. Because COP26 of the climate change must be inclusive, must be building the resilience and giving the hope for the peoples that are left behind. And that also will be a lesson learned for the green recovery, that must not leave anyone behind, to give us chance to all contribute and protect our peoples and our planet. Thank you so much again for this opportunity.
Thank you, Hindu, so much. Again, such important points raised there. Yeah. Okay, so we've got lots of really interesting questions that have been raised. So a lot of these questions have brought up how much people have enjoyed the presentations today. So first of all, if we can start with the question, actually, Ingrid, Aida has asked in relation to women in the Shawi community, what have their experiences been? Can you tell us a little bit more about that, because that was raised?
Yes, sure. I couldn't speak much with women because, as I said, it's a very traditional community. And for example, women are not allowed to participate in general assemblies. It's only the men, the head of the family, who participate and have a voice. So it's a very difficult for them to even understand that I wanted to talk with them. When I approached them, I was like, my husband is not here, like, or there is not my elder son, and I was like, but I want to talk with you. And they didn't want to, but because they didn't understand that they might have a saying about it. And I think they are having a hugely responsibility now, because they are the ones who are dedicated to farming and to breed small animals, who are right now the safety net of their food system. So there's a growing importance then, and I couldn't catch that up. So that's why all the narrative I have found is a narrative more related to the forest, because it's the space where the men go to hunt, right? Where they go to fish. So it's more related to that. I couldn't.
Thank you. That's really interesting. I think Hindu also brought up this point that women, of course, are even more, well, they shouldn't be, I shouldn't be saying of course, but they are the reality, more marginalized. But often they are the workers and the innovators. I think those are really important points. So there's a really important aspect of intersectionality comes in here, doesn't it? Great. So a general question to you all, to the whole panel. How does one increase local agency, provide a voice and capacity building tools without patronizing and overpowering local communities? So how does one increase local agency, provide a voice, capacity building tools without patronizing and overpowering local communities? Who'd like to start discussion on this point? Thank you, Hindu. Yeah.
Thank you. I think that local agency can empower in a different way. You know what we have been asked as indigenous peoples? All the times that peoples just come to us as beneficiaries. They met the solutions, and then they come like, oh, you want to have water? We wanted to implement for you the water point. You want to have this? We wanted to implement for you that. But the issue is, of course, yes, we want to have them, but maybe it is not our priority. So just like you need to listen from the communities, go to the ground, listen from the community first. Maybe they have their own priorities to set up, and empower yourself. That's why we put in the local communities and indigenous peoples platform under the convention of the climate change. We say that the capacity building need to be both way, from the government to indigenous peoples and from indigenous peoples to government. Because if you do not understand our culture, you do not understand our identity, how we live. Inga taught you, if you wanted to talk to the woman, you go there, she can tell you, my husband is not there, you cannot talk to me. But if you build this as process and you understand this culture, you can just approach the man first, and then the man can do the work for you. He can go and talk to the woman and tell her, okay, go and do it. So this is the capacity building for me. It has to be both way. The local agency cannot design the program and come to the communities. They need to listen from the communities and give them direct access to the funding and maybe to the tools they want, and they can make it locally. And then it can be sustainable way of its changing.
Thank you. Adele, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I definitely agree with what Hindu had to say. I mean, speaking as a researcher and also as an adaptation practitioner, it's this, coming with an external and a foreign lens, and we're going to come into your community and tell you what's best for you and tell you how you need to implement it. And that doesn't work. I mean, take for an example, Haiti. Like, Haiti has had so much development aid and climate change projects and et cetera, and they are still so vulnerable because bringing these external lenses, it's not fit to the context. So I think much more engagement and involvement and meaningful involvement of communities in coming up with solutions is needed, rather than coming in with some framework that may have worked somewhere else that is not adapted to the particular context, and then you're just speaking to people and not actually inputting what they have to say. So yeah.
Thank you. Ingrid?
Yes, I think that there was also another question about like civil society and what could they do from the Peruvian side. And I think it's really important, like we have to listen, as Hindu said, we have to listen what they are saying. And what they are saying right now, at least the Shawis, is that they want to protect the forest, they want to protect their land. So land is a very big issue there. And the only way they could do it right now is by changing the law. And they don't have the power, they don't have the population to put their leaders in the Congress to change it. But we might, like civil society, have to listen to that. And we want to like take this struggle as our own struggle too. We might help with that. And in this sense, I think next year is like presidential elections here in Peru. So I think we could listen, and we could listen who is like really taking their points of view on how do we protect their land. So I think it's very important for it.
Yeah, this point Jessica brings up very importantly. We don't need to be experts. You know, you mentioned we don't need to be experts in order to help. So what are the really concrete actions we can get involved with or start or, you know, agitate? How can we show our resistance? A question for us to think about. Anybody like to give us some?
From my perspective, there have been lots of these social movements that have popped up from the Black Lives Matter movement, and they're all around. So you can look at things that are in your area that you can get involved with, or you can create something that, you know, that stands for the change that you want to see. I think we each need to be more active in what it is that we want to see changed. So you can be appalled and horrified, but then what are you going to do about it? And it's not just, I mean, we need government action, we need international action, but we also need individual change. And I think thinking about how you are part of systems and how does that contribute to inequality and injustice. And I just really wanted to underscore, like, it's everywhere. It's not just in Peru, or, you know, it's everywhere. And so where you are part of some system that is contributing to this injustice that's everywhere. And so do your research and look at what you can be involved with, and donate to institutions and people that are doing this work, and, you know, put your action behind what it is that you stand for.
Thank you so much. Really, really important point. Mark asks us to think about linking the degrowth movement with climate crisis movement and the World Parliament movement. How can we sort of get them together, working together? How might those help?
I think he's asking about the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goal number 17. It is called for partnership. So when you take all the 17 goals, 16 of them are targeting from poverty to gender, from land to oceans, from people in the rural areas to the cities. So from our health to our educations. So it's gathering all what we want to get recreated to give us the better world. And it's closing by this number 17, who's saying we need a partnership. So this partnership must be built in an equal way with everybody, from the private sectors to the governments, from the civil societies to the indigenous communities, to all the movement. They need to come and have a common ground where they can see themselves acting on it. And that's take us to the previous questions that Adele responded very well. We need all to act. We need all to see where we have to hang and which kind of movement that we have to support. And I love what somebody said, that people power is bigger than people's in power. So how we can use the people movement power and take it together I give you the concrete examples. You know, in my organizations, we have the scientists who are meteorological peoples, and the meteorological scientists, they work from the office and from the aviation office in order to give the weather forecast. So then they give it in the radios and TVs and in the language that broader people only can understand. I took these people to my community who are the nomadic. They never gone to the indigenous communities. I just to say, like, sit there and sit with them. There are no houses, there are trees, there are hoods, that's it. And then when they start is changing with my communities around the traditional knowledge, they understood that even they can do them work, but if it's not linking with the traditional knowledge, and if it is not reaching to those people who are left behind, so they are something that left. And when I took them to the communities, I took the government also to listen. So just like the three partnership, government, scientists, indigenous peoples, it's helped to build better policies, help to build better knowledge as knowledge system together, and that can give the resilience to the peoples. So we need all to come in partnership, but in the equal way, respecting each other.
Thank you. That really relates to Dan's question he's brought up about scientific knowledge created Western or white nations, and what are good examples of co-creating knowledge in a collaborative way. I think absolutely that equality is so important, isn't it, within co-creation and partnership. So bringing in all the diverse interests in traditional communities and listening to each other, so that's really important. Thank you. So Frida,
can I
is
just
asked,
respond to that? Sorry.
Yes, please.
Yeah, but I think we need to also go further. So for me as a researcher, and I've been challenged by this. So co-creating knowledge is not just going and interviewing people and then putting down and then putting your lens on it, and then you publish it and it's in your name. Mm-hmm. It's working together with people, having them co-create what the actual text says, what the lens says, what the framing of it is, and all of you contributing to the piece that comes out of that. And so I think we have a long ways to go in that. So there is, a legacy of people from European and American institutions coming into the developing world, doing their research, getting that information from people, and then they publish it. And if the people themselves haven't had a role in shaping what the actual narrative is, then it's still your lens that you're putting on what people have to say. And I think we need to do much better in that. I think there are new models in community science engagement where you actually have communities themselves that are contributing and playing a bigger role in the final product. And so it's their perspective that is being put forth and not you putting your lens that you come in with. Yeah.
Adele, that's really important. It's real questions of ethics there. Ethics in relation to how you engage and how you acquire and use information. That's really, really important. Thank you. So Frida, big question, Frida, you've asked. I would love to hear from the panel their hopes for next year's COP26, as well as the UN Biodiversity Summit, COP15. So what do you think are the main outcomes that you would like to see from these summits, given, the little regard paid to human rights, it would seem?
In my case, I would like for governments to have a better or a stronger law about protecting indigenous lands. And I think in the case of Peru, this is very important, and it's because the change of the constitution in '93 that indigenous people have lost the rights to protect their lands. So this is hugely important for them, and I think they are trying to work and they are trying to have a say in that. So I think we need to listen. And if we want to build a future together, we need to listen what these people in the in these communities, like next to these forests that are so important for us, are doing and are asking.
Anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with Inga. So COP26 of climate change and COP15 on biodiversities, they have to be the COP of peoples, the summit of peoples, not the summit of institutions. We don't want to see again a new report that coming or new decision that coming, or they do not listen for the scientists, what they are telling them. We wanted to see them get a real commitment, real engagement that what they are going to do. We wanted to see an action plan actually from each countries of those COPs to show us how they are going to reduce the emissions from all the carbon in the atmosphere. We need them to show us how they're going to protect the nature, how they are restoring the ecosystem, how they are going to respect our rights, how they are going to make us in space to sit in the tables and take the decisions, how they can translate all the talks that they give for years and years through a concrete action. We wanted to see those two COP, how they can move from numbers of the money that they wanted to commit it to the cash that they are investing in our communities to turn it. By the next coming COP, we wanted to see that all those solutions starting working. So this is my hope for me. It can be virtually, it will be excluding peoples. If we got the chance to meet physically, it will also exclude peoples. But if the mind are not excluded, if they think bigger, they think for those who are not there with them, and then that can give us more hope. But anyway, Adele, Inga, myself, or Amita and all, we will be watching them and we will be there supporting for the positive actions. That will be very important for the boss COP to change the behavior on our human being and nature relationship.
Thank you.
And I'll just chime in. I really do not like COPs. I have been to several of the climate change COPs, and I am always a mess at the end because it is so frustrating seeing the negotiating on things that are so minor when we have huge problems to tackle. And I think that was quite present at the last COP. Key areas that need to be advanced are loss and damage. So we've heard about loss and damage today that is occurring, and still within the COP, we don't have progress on providing support for communities that are already experiencing these negative impacts of climate change and that need support to address them. So I would like to see that we actually make some progress on that in this next COP. I think definitely an action plan on ambitious change for how we're going to actually keep global temperatures to 1.5 degrees. So we had the wonderful IPCC special report on 1.5, and to be at COP and see the disregard for the findings of the reports and the lack of attention being paid to the need for ambitious and unprecedented mitigation and adaptation was very disheartening to me. I think COP has become increasingly frustrating for young people that actually want to see change and to see negotiations that are not stepping up to the plate and meeting the challenges that we need to overcome in order to prevent these dangerous climate change impacts from occurring. And then I also think that this COP needs to build on, I mean, 2020 has been a momentous and significant year, and we need to learn about working with each other. We need to learn from these social movements that have occurred and to actually be more inclusive, so that sitting at the tables, I saw one of the questions, should Indigenous people be at all tables? Absolutely, they should. And so should communities of color, and so should other people. Like these negotiations need to reflect the world and people, and not just be the white elderly men in suits that are making decisions that affect everyone. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Yeah, Ian brings up a really important point. Thanks, Ian. He says, you know, how important it is to have Indigenous peoples given major seats at all tables, at all meetings, from local to COP. So vital decisions are made by societies whom are being affected the most by racism, sexism, marginalization, and climate crisis as a whole. I think we agree with you. Yeah, how to do that, how to make sure that that happens, you know, how do we put pressure on governments and authorities to make sure that that people are included in discussions? I think absolutely. Yeah. So Juliet asks a question, an important question. Do we know of any case studies which are constructively confronting and deconstructing climate justice, colonization, and racial justice? Can we think of case studies that are... That's so depressing, isn't it?
It is depressing.
It is. Currently, I'm working with the Ashaninka people in my region for like this second part of my research. And like, for example, I'm working only with women now. And I think it was really important for me to try to approach women, and now it's only women I'm working with. And I'm working with the women organization, and they are really inspiring. Like, even they always tell this story about how like the men allow them to have their own organization, and how like it's difficult, like even nowadays, for them to keep like organizing, to keep like making these workshops to try to teach other women, because like usually here indigenous women do not attend to schools or don't finish it. So there is a really stronger need for capacity building, but not from me, not from outsiders, from them. And how do they understand their history? How do they understand their place in the community? And I think it's really inspiring to see that happening. And I'm really glad that maybe I will, next time, I will talk about my results with them.
Mm-hmm.
I think it is not a case study. It is our daily realities. If you live in like community like mine, in many other indigenous communities, if you live in a region like Africa, Latin America, or all the Caribbeans, like the Pacific regions from my brothers and sisters, indigenous communities there, you don't need the case study to define that your social, racial, sexual, or just identity and justice. It is your daily life, and it is your daily fight. And that's also why I am always fighting for my peoples, for indigenous peoples, fighting as women for women inclusiveness, and fighting for all the developing nations that are left behind by these developed countries or developed world, that colonizations are leaving us the history that we didn't construct. I think it is our reality. You know, in my country, we got independence just 60 years ago. Like when my mother born, my father born during the colonization. Just like when I get born, I born after the colonization. They cut our land. They destroy our communities, our way of living. That's why like my peoples are coming from five countries: Chad, Cameroon, Nigeria, Central African Republic. And we still moving around those borders. But those borders cutting, like calling my country Chad, calling my direct cousin country Cameroon, calling my other uncle from my father Niger, my uncle from my father Nigeria, and my other direct cousin Central African Republic. This is the injustice. It is not a case study or movie. It is a reality that we are living, and that is following us with all the climate injustice because of our race, because of our appartenance, and because of we are indigenous. So they create all these escalators. So I don't think that we need the case study, but we need to see the realities and solve them from what we are living on.
Thank you. David brings up a really interesting point about a discussion going on that Nick Armin at UCL suggested this morning. Yeah, this about transition town activists wanting to take away from the opportunity to develop, to stop, say, African nations from enjoying the fruits of development. Yeah, so this question of, you know, this fight between development and sustaining, you know, resources, ensuring sustainability, often perhaps fights against this, you know, the idea of development as it's been framed. What we mean by development also is up for debate. Yeah, that's an important point. And he brings up the Transition Network org on Black Lives Matters. Thank you for that, David. Yeah, very interesting, complicated debate there. Right. Yeah, would citizen assemblies be useful forms of engagement to make participatory democracy work better to combat social, racial, and environmental justice, all the way from the local level right up to international, like COP26? So, citizens assemblies. Yes, Hindu, please. Do you?
I say yes, because maybe this person also was there in the last COP 2025 in Madrid. Because when we was waiting, you know, COP of the Madrid was the one longer in the history of negotiations, because we stayed all until Sunday, the end of the day, because we was waiting for the plenary of the countries to come and conclude the decision of the COP. While they didn't come, as they are calling us observer, all the civil society group, the indigenous peoples, they are calling us observer. We have no information from what is happening in the small room, a small group of selected peoples that discussing. And suddenly, sadly, not only us, but also the chair of a small the development islands, the chair of developing countries are left behind in those negotiations. And at the end of the day, I was one of the others who lead this movement to say we are going to do a people's closing plenary. So that's why I say, like, this person must understand. We say we don't care about them because they are negotiating our lives just in their hand, excluding us. So we need this people's closing plenary. And we organize the people closing plenary, including all the peoples at the negotiation without discrimination. You want to speak, you raise your hand, you go there and you speak. And we make our closing. And from that one, we build it a movement of how we can come all together and make it from local to national to regional and to international. All the COP must listen to the peoples. They must listen to us, not only to the selected delegate that can talk. So we must do it and take the spaces and make our voices hear, because it is about us, about our lives. They cannot decide about us without us.
Thank you, really.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely agreed with that.
Thank you. Right. Oops. So I think I'm sorry. There is certain specific questions to presenters that may actually. I think it would be a really good idea if you were to contact you know, either of our presenters to raise these questions. I think that they're really interesting, but probably take more time than we can accommodate today. So please do that. I very much encourage you to connect with our wonderful presenters today and ask these questions. Right. Okay. So yes, the recording will be made available on YouTube, and and thank you all for our listeners and participants today for asking really important, cogent questions for us. Yeah, what can I say? This has been one of the best, can I say, workshop, conference, webinars that I've been involved with.
You want to say women powers?
I would say woman power.
Yeah.
I would say woman power, yeah, and Black woman power, yeah. Yeah, it is obvious there is so much work to do, but without your hugely important work, without your insights, without your knowledge and experiences and your time towards this, where would we be? It's looking not great for us at the moment, for the planet, but it would be so much more bleak if you were not here, guys. And I can say really say this without any doubt. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us today. It's so important. And it's obvious that we have to keep fighting. We all have to work together, whatever gender, color, background we are, to recognize our interconnectivity, our humanity, and what we owe to the future generations and to the planet, to work towards, you know, our really important fight to get this message across, because yeah, we really need to do that. We really do. So can I take this opportunity to thank you from the bottom of my heart, and from thank you also to the Priestley Centre for giving us this opportunity to get together and make these connections, and yeah, lots and lots to think about and lots to act on, which is really important. So thank you all. Thank you. So that ends our conference day. We're just around about, we could have gone on, but around time. So please do get in contact with us and connect with us, the Priestley Centre, School of Law, University of Leeds, and thank you very much.
Thank you for
Bye-bye.
sharing.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
I want to say you all did a fantastic job. That was so inspiring, and I put on my bright yellow jumper to try and compete.
Thank you, Piers, for hosting us.
Yeah, thank you so much, Piers. It's really great. And I'm so happy to be with all my three sisters there. That's wonderful.
It is really wonderful. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yes, wonderful. Thanks, everyone.
Let's keep connecting. Yes.
Right.
Yeah, we can get together with a cop.
Yes.
See you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.